Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today we have the respiratory system. I am Dr. Sima Ahmed. The respiratory system is a complex of organ and tissue which are necessary to exchange blood CO2 with air oxygen. The respiratory system has two components, the conducting portion and the respiratory portion. The conducting portion is transport passages that transmit air from exterior to the respiratory portion. The nasal cavity, nasopharynx, then larynx, trachea, bronchi, then bronchioles, and terminal bronchioles. While the respiratory portion, where the main function of gas exchange occur, consists of respiratory bronchiole, alveolar ducts, and alveoli. What's happening in the respiratory system? Clean, warm, and humidify the inspired air by conducting portion. Gas exchange by respiratory portion. The olfactory mucosa contain the smell receptor and the larynx production of sound. The respiratory epithelium is ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium with goblet cell. The function of this epithelium is work as a barrier to pathogen and foreign particle, prevent infection and tissue injury via the use of mucociliary elevator, act to protect and effectively clear the airway and lung of inhaled pathogen and irritant. The pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium with goblet cell of respiratory epithelium consists of 5 types of cells: ciliated columnar cell, goblet cell, basal cell, and brush and neuroendocrine cells. The typical respiratory epithelium, as we said, consists of 5 cell types. The ciliated columnar cell are most numerous type, has about 300 cilia. In the case of immotile cilia syndrome, causes infertility in men and chronic respiratory tract infection. We have also in this respiratory epithelium, goblet cell is the second most numerous type, with basal nuclei and the cytoplasm is filled with mucus. Basal cells are small and still on basement membrane. It's considered a stem cell. Brush cell, rare cell, columnar with afferent nerve ending on basal surface. It's considered chemosensory receptor. Neuroendocrine cells are also rare and represent only 100% of the cells in respiratory epithelium. The nasal cavity is divided into vestibule and nasal fossa. The vestibule is about 1.5 cm of conductive portion after nostrils, lined with keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium, like the skin. Nostril inner surface contain sebaceous gland and sweat gland with thick, short hairs, while the nasal fossa the osseous nasal septum separate the two cavernous chambers of the skull From each lateral wall extend 3 bony concha: superior, middle, inferior. The concha increase the surface area of the nasal cavity. Middle and inferior conchae linked by respiratory epithelium, while superior conchae lined by specialized olfactory epithelium. The olfactory mucosa, responsible for the sensation of smell and flavor. It's a special type of mucosa. It's located in the roof of the nasal cavity and superior concha. The olfactory mucosa within the nasal cavity consists of epithelium and lamina propria. In lamina propria, we found the olfactory nerve, villi olfactoria, and blood vessel, and olfactory gland, Bowman glands. The olfactory epithelium is a pseudostratified columnar epithelium. We see 3 types of cell in olfactory epithelium: basal cells, supporting cell, and olfactory receptor cell. The basal cell consider the stem cell for the other olfactory cells. It's a small cone shape, rests on the basement membrane, this blue one, not in contact with the lumen. Their nuclei are close to the basement membrane. The supporting cell are tall, this is the rose color, tall with microvilli. The nuclei is close to the lumen with a narrow base contact basement membrane. They give mechanical metabolic support to the basal and olfactory cells. Now, this green cell, the olfactory receptor cells, are the bipolar neuron with central bulge contain the nucleus, and from the cell extend dendritic and proximal processes. The olfactory cell processes are the dendritic processes, here and down in the photo, and proximal processes, here in red, up of the photo. The dendritic processes extend to the surface epithelium, which bear cilia that project into the nasal cavity. These cilia are sensitive to odors, substances. The proximal processes, very narrow, pass between the basal and sustentacular cells to penetrate the basement membrane and join the other proximal processes of other cells to form a small bundle and direct towards the brain, where they synapse with a neuron of the brain olfactory loop. Beneath the epithelium, as we said, of the olfactory mucosa, the lamina propria contains a small serous gland called Bowman gland. And here in the middle, the violet is the Bowman gland. Their secretion may act as a solvent for the odorous substances. It's a serous glands. Paranasal sinuses are closed cavities in the frontal, maxillary, ethmoid, and sphenoid bone. They are lined with thin respiratory epithelium. This thin respiratory epithelium contains few goblet cells. Their lamina propria contain only few small serous and mucous glands in lamina propria. Those sinuses communicate with the nasal cavity through small opening, and mucus produced in the sinuses is drained into the nasal cavity by the action of the ciliated epithelium cells. These sinuses help to increase the surface area for moistening and warming the inhaled air. Also, the sinus cavities play a role in the nature of sounds. In the case of the sinusitis, it's an inflammatory process occur due to obstruction of the sinus opening. Nasopharynx consists of nasopharynx. The pharynx consists of nasopharynx and oropharynx. The pharynx connects the nasal cavity with larynx. The nasopharynx is the first part of the pharynx, continuing carefully with the oropharynx. The nasopharynx lined with respiratory epithelium, while oropharynx lined with stratified squamous epithelium, like oral cavity and esophagus. Lymphocytes frequently accumulate beneath the epithelium of pharynx and surrounding the opening of digestive and respiratory passages, forming tonsils. Larynx connect pharynx and trachea. The vocal fold of the larynx control airflow and allow the production of sound. The vocal folds are lined by stratified squamous epithelium and contain the muscle, striated skeletal, and ligaments needed to control the tension of the vocal folds. Thanks a lot. Next lecture we will study trachea and its branches,